Our next presentation is called Out of Thin Air, Mounting and Installing Tiffany Studios Hartwell Memorial Window at the Art Institute of Chicago. Andrew Talley is the senior Mountmaker at the Art Institute of Chicago. He has been the Mountmaker at the Art Institute for more than 20 years now. Beyond designing mounts for objects, he has a particular interest in fabricating specialized lifting and support structures for object movement and installation. Unfortunately, Andrew cannot be here today, but Rachel is here. Rachel Sabino is the Director of Objects and Textiles Conservation at the Art Institute of Chicago. She's in objects conservation specializing in non-metal inorganics. She is currently Director of Objects and Textile Conservation at the Art Institute of Chicago. Rachel has previously worked at the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, the National Gallery of London, and the Chicago Conservation Center.
Good morning, IMF. Thank you for inviting us to the podium. And it's true, Andy can't be here today, which is a shame because this is definitely one of those projects where the conservator and the Mountmaker were sort of umbilically attached for years. But I'll do my best to answer technical questions that he would have answered better. But all the same, we're glad to be able to share this with you today. So in May of 2021, the Art Institute unveiled a once-in-a-generation acquisition, the Hartwell Memorial Window. From start to finish, the project took 4 years and is an unprecedented approach to the display and mounting of stained glass. The window was commissioned in 1917 for the Central Baptist Church in Providence, Rhode Island, by Mary Hartwell in honor of her late husband. It's monumental, measuring more than 25 feet high and 15 feet wide, and was installed another 25 feet above the altar. Tiffany Studios in New York was the obvious choice for a landscape on this scale. It's made up of 48 separate panels. The lower register has 2 components, a trefoil arch and an inscription panel. The 5 central lancets contain 3 panels each, and there are 3 rows of tracery at the top. The panels are very thick, sometimes with as much as 5 layers of glass, so they are very, very heavy and very unwieldy and fragile. Extraction was done from the interior on a scaffold, and each panel was given a custom housing for the 900-mile road trip back to Chicago. There are only 2 or 3 places in the museum where something this large can fit, and in the end, it was decided that this walkway above the main staircase in our Michigan Avenue entrance was most appropriate. The advantages of this space: we have plenty of wall, and there the advantages stop. The disadvantages: it is a very, very narrow space. There is no void behind the wall for infrastructure or lighting, and there's a massive amount of light competition from a skylight above. So to make this space work in front of the wall, we were going to need 1, some sort of framework to carry the nearly 1,100 pounds of glass. 2, a light source strong enough to penetrate all those layers of glass. And 3, some kind of decorative cover or housing to contain it all. On top of these functional requirements, conservation imposed 2 more. They were non-negotiable. We needed to be able to remove any single panel without disturbing the rest of the window, and we needed to be able to access the lighting system without having to move any glass. And because the walkway is so narrow, less than 6 feet, something like that, all of this had to interconnect within a very shallow profile. There's really no precedent for this exact combination of conditions. At the Art Institute, we're no strangers to displaying big stained glass. Here's our Chagall windows. But like the Chagall, other windows of a comparable size usually have a deep cavity where massive quantities of bulbs can go, or there are openings to the exterior where natural daylight can do the heavy lifting. And most of the time, it's possible to copy the way they were installed in their original locations, frequently using wooden frames. After a long, long time of research, talking, sketching, drawing, mock-ups, and field tests, this is what we landed on. So going from back to front on this diagram, we have a steel frame, and behind this frame are two tracks where the lighting is suspended. They're not really rendered particularly well on this build set. So these tracks, though, can be pulled out to the side to get to the lights. The stained glass itself is mounted onto metal plates, and these plates are bolted to the steel frame, and then there's a decorative cover that clips onto the front. And this package, as built, is less than 12 inches deep. Both to design and implement this, we partnered with colleagues from many different disciplines, structural engineers, first and foremost, to consider things like load, air movement, anchoring systems, plus the impact of construction in the immediate gallery as well as adjacent ones. Their input was translated by a local fabrication company who built and installed the steel frame and the lighting tracks. We worked with a lighting designer to find a product that would give us the maximum output in the least amount of space. This was a new product on the market at the time, and it's basically strips of LED diodes all strung together to make like a curtain. There were a lot of decisions to be made about this decorative cover, which we ultimately decided should be derivative of the original. So we had a laser scan done back at the church, and our designers took that data as the basis for the design. This scan was also crucial for dimensioning the steel frame and plates. The decorative cover was made of high-density foam by the same fabrication company who made the steel frame. It consists of many, many sections and uses a cleating system to engage with the subframe. In terms of mounting the glass, the basic concept for every piece, be it large or small, was to secure it to the reverse of aluminum plate with brackets made from aluminum Z-bar. There's an inherent simplicity and modularity to this idea, but actually the process itself was extremely labor-intensive. And I must give credit where it's due. This concept is a riff off the mounting method used at the V&A. I showed a slide of that earlier. Here it is in the lower right. But instead of two brackets, we used one, which we felt was more flexible in the end. Unfortunately, none of the panels are exactly the same dimensions, which made cutting the openings in the plates for the glass extremely tedious and anxiety-inducing, required a lot of judgment by eye and cutting or assembling by hand. As Vincent mentioned, you can laser cut things, but there's always nuance that needs to be factored in, so we figured why cut out the middleman and just do it ourselves. This was one of the most daunting aspects of the job. It meant a lot of tedious back and forth, reconciling rubbings we took in the church against mylar tracings that we made against printouts of the laser scan. And we were not able to, in the church, there was lead putty around the perimeters of all of the glass, and it blended sort of seamlessly with the white, the white surround of the masonry. So all of these inconsistencies weren't visible, but we weren't going to have the advantage of distance or darkness or height, so we knew that we were going to have to present something that gave the impression of uniformity, even though there was none. So if we didn't find some way to arrive at a common denominator and regularize the windows within the openings of the decorative cover, which was going to be uniform, it was really going to look like we had tried to do something and failed. So the amount of prep work going into this process was formidable. Once the plates were cut, we had to make the brackets, and in order to do that, we had to carry out full test fittings of each plate. Why, you ask? To, one, determine what shape Z-bar we needed, because we were using a couple of different profiles, and also to understand where we could put the brackets and how much pressure we could safely apply. To make the windows plumb inside the plates, since they don't seat against each other at right angles, we needed to use shims, so we needed to be able to check our work from the front. And the panels can only safely be handled in an upright position. So to facilitate all of this work, Andy fabricated this custom easel. We typically used straight sections for the brackets, but here and there it was necessary to customize them to accommodate curves or notches. And whenever I talk about this window, I'm always trying to find ways to explain just how big it is. I mean, pictures do a decent job. That's me there for scale. But my favorite analogy is that we used 216 feet of Z-bar stock, and 216 feet is the equivalent, actually it's slightly longer than 2 blue whales lined up nose to tail. One of the other challenges in managing a job of this scale was simply finding enough room. We pushed ourselves into whatever available space we could find or borrow. We were very lucky that coincidentally there was an empty gallery available for us to use where we could store the glass and do the test fittings. But on any other given day, you would be just as likely to find us using hallways and even spilling over into spaces that colleagues generously lent to us, like this cage that actually belongs to our IT department, to say nothing of the process of transiting the mounts back and forth through active galleries to and from the mount shop. In order to cross a panel off the list, an entire series of smaller tasks was required, and keeping track of each of these subtasks toward the larger objective was a job in and of itself. I'm a very visual person, so in addition to countless task lists, these two sets of diagrams tracking progress became indispensable, essential documents. Now, almost all stained glass needs lateral support to keep it from bowing or slumping. And the most common way of doing this is to put metal rods called saddle bars against the face of the glass. The ends of the bars go into the wood or masonry architecture, making a support kind of like a ladder. Wires are soldered onto the surface of the window, and then those wires are wrapped around the bars to hold the glass rigid against the support structure. But when you remove an object like this from its original context, you have to make a decision about how you're going to provide that kind of structural support across the face. If you can't or don't want to do it, you have the option of separating the sections and framing them individually, like this image here on the left. But if you do that, you lose the seamlessness of the design, and you wind up with these thick black separations between the panels. This obviously was not an acceptable solution for our curators. It's possible that you can also put the saddle bars on the back of the glass instead of the front, but as you'll recall, our panels have that elaborate buildup of glass, so that wasn't an option either. So because we were mounting the glass behind the plate, it meant we would have a 1/4 inch of aluminum between the saddle bars and the glass. But by cutting notches into the plate, it made it possible to lay the saddle bar flush against the glass once again, and a routed out socket in the bracket behind the saddle bar serves to hold it captive. We used a small steel tab to close the saddle bar down and prevent it from moving or rotating. And so essentially, the saddle bars are functioning exactly the way they did in the church. Here you see this in play during install. We're closing up the tabs and the tie wires are open and ready to be twisted in place around the saddle bar. In the lowermost register, the trefoil panels had been held above the inscription panels by a metal strap called a T-bar. And to accommodate this, we cut 2 slots into the aluminum plate and slid the T-bar through. And as a result, the T-bar supports the glass above the inscription plate just the same way it did in Providence. And I know these seem like really nerdy kinds of details, but this is actually the part of the project we're the most proud of. A lot of times these types of components get discarded, but not only did we return each and every movable piece of the original setting detail to its rightful place, we restored them to their original function. When it came time to install the window, the narrow walkway also made things challenging for us. We spent quite a lot of time planning and choreographing our movements back here to come up with a safe and efficient order of operations. We packed a ton of gear and people into this confined space, but nonetheless, we still needed to spill over into an adjacent gallery. To ensure we could work with as much concentration and privacy as possible, we erected a large screen above the balustrade, giving visitors only a shadow puppet performance of what was happening. Our installation team was seriously uncomfortable about the prospect of lifting upwards of 150 pounds of glass and plate from mobile lift equipment that was close to 20 feet in the air. So one of our biggest priorities was finding a way to accommodate their concerns in the mounting strategy. So we fabricated a set of 3 aluminum frames, differently sized according to the sizes of the panels. These frames get bolted onto the fronts of the plates during install, and even though their main purpose is to hold the plates rigid until they're secured onto the steel frame, by adding these handles here, we provided a huge biomechanical assist to the team. We also modified the lift equipment by adding a series of shelves and racks to take the weight of the glass and plates and give them all a stable surface to rest on during movement and lifting. So with all these modifications combined, it means the only lift the installers really have to make is for a few brief seconds during the transfer from the shelf to the frame. They can be way up in the air with a fully loaded plate, taller than themselves, and what is potentially a harrowing operation becomes a smooth, controlled one. And I have to say we're pretty proud of this too. Even with these modifications, the largest unit we felt we could safely lift was the 2 bottom panels of the primary lancets. And here it's necessary to understand how the windows join together. In that image on the far left, you see that the bottom panel has an upside down U shape, and the plate above it locks down over it with a piece of H-shaped channel. In order to engage the top pointed panel in the lancet, the last one to position in place, it would mean that we had to leave the bottom of the plate open. So to prevent the unsupported glass from sliding out the bottom, we used these steel wedges. The very tip of that wedge fits into a small notch we cut into the side perimeter lead, and that wedge, that small point, takes the weight of the glass as it's being lifted up until the point when the weight is redistributed, transferred and redistributed onto the other piece of glass. With all the plates installed, the last step before the grand reveal was to attach all the decorative segments. And here in its final state is how our visitors find it. It's now one of the icons of our museum, and we're incredibly proud of the part we played in bringing it to life. So thanks for your attention.
So I have to say, I'm really impressed with that. This is going to be, speaking of nerdy things, but the equipment that you made to carry, the trays you made with the handles to carry the sheets of glass, that is really cool. I love those.
Yeah.
And just modifying the equipment that existed.
Yeah.
I feel like we have to do that a lot.
We try to be thoughtful of the people around us, so.
We have one question online. The lights, do you have regular access to be able to maintain those lights behind there?
The drivers are located on the wall behind, so we can service the drivers at any time. But if any of the lighting components themselves, the diodes, or any of the wiring that connects the drivers to the strips, if that needs servicing, we can pull they disarticulate sort of half. So we can pull apart one side and bring the sort of trolley out and service the lights and send it back in, and same thing with the other side. Does that answer the question? Yeah.
So with there not being any putty, is there any issue with the softness of the lead caming around the windows interfacing with those Z-clips? Did you have a softened or like some other type of interface in between those that kept that from interacting like that?
So there's Velara between the perimeter leads and the aluminum. And also as a precaution, I did coat the faces of the leads with B72. So yeah, we put as many barrier layers as we could between the two metals.
Great,
yeah.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question about the time. You said it took about 4 years.
Yeah.
I know often we work on big projects, although I've never worked on a 4-year project, but what is your feeling when you're done? Like, are you happy? Are you sad that it's over? Or, I'm sure there's a lot of
No, it's true.
emotions,
There
but-
was very mixed feelings, because it was, as I've heard many of you already share, it was interrupted by the pandemic. So our curators had made the acquisition in 2017. I went out to look at it in situ in 2018, and then active conservation began in 2019, pandemic. And yet, it was there were very few projects that were greenlit. Once staff could re-enter the museum in July or whatever it typically was, this was one that the director said, yeah, we want to have this open when the museum opens as a sign of hope, and we were all like, oh God. So we don't feel hopeful. But I mean, one of the mixed blessings was that there was nothing else to work on. So even though it was, you probably saw the same 4 guys, me, the 2 American art handling specialists, and Andy. It was us alone in the building for, I would say, a good 6 months, and then we kind of reopened and then shut again. And so for a while we were just like us alone in the museum. And so we were able to, we were still asked to hurry. But it meant we could focus in a different way and had different kinds of resources at our disposal. So, but when it was over, I think we were the main thing about when it was finished was that at no time ever were we ever able to do a real proof of concept, because you can't assemble it, see how it's working, take it apart. So we were forecasting and planning, and there's always this feeling in the pit of your stomach when on the day of install, like, did we forget to divide by 3 somewhere, or, you know, one of these things? And it went up, and it really, you know, when something is done right, you know, and you're like, it's solid. And so that was the feeling of like huge relief, like it worked. And then it was almost like we didn't know what to do with ourselves after. Yeah, for sure.
Well,
Yeah.
that's amazing. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much,
Sure.
Rachel.